Today we're talking with J.T. Wilcox, a state representative in the 2nd District and the leader of the House Republican Caucus. Thank you for taking the time to meet today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
The first question I'd like to ask you is on the minds of many Republicans across the state, and frankly, a complaint that I've seen on social media frequently. Why does it seem as if our state representatives and senators have been so quiet the last few weeks?
That is a great question, and we hear it quite a bit on our own social media. A challenge that we have in the legislature, especially when the governor is getting so much attention right now, that able to command that megaphone whenever he decides that he wants to have a press availability, is that we have election year restrictions that mean that we can't use any public resources to help with our communications. So even though we've got what I think is a really good communications shop in the House Republican Caucus, they can't do anything for us except in very, very limited circumstances. They can't set up interviews. They can't, help research issues, and they can't write anything for us. So, and they can't really use our communications on the caucus social media either. So the biggest megaphones that we have are unusable because of regulations that are designed to prevent the use of public resources for campaigning. And so what that means is that we end up using our campaign media ourselves. And so most people know I'm pretty active on social media in a couple of different channels, and many of our members are also active. And so that is what we have to use. I have had quite a bit of media attention. There hasn't been a week that's gone by that I haven't been on some part of the Puget Sound major media, whether it's radio, TV, or print. And I really try hard to get out into the rest of Washington. Sometimes people think about that as the real Washington. So I have a lot of press contacts out there as well. So we have our hands tied a little bit, but I think most members are trying very hard to make the impact that we have. But, when the governor calls, the press comes running, and nobody's megaphone can match his.
Yesterday, Governor Inslee announced a rollback on the state's Safe Start plan concerning social gatherings. And starting on Monday, gatherings will be limited to less than 10 people. Do you have any comments about these continued restrictions being imposed by our governor?
Well, I absolutely do. And they would take a couple of different directions. First of all, this is not nothing. We want people to be very careful, especially when they are in a demographic that can be hurt more easily, older people or impaired people in particular. However, because the governor has gone with compulsion instead of education and requesting, I think a lot of times it's been far less effective. And I pay a lot of attention to the daily statistics that the Department of Health puts out. And in fact, I've asked the governor's staff many times, what statistics are you looking at? And every single time they say, well, we're looking at the same thing that you are on the Department of Health. And when you look at that in a way that's broken down by county, you find that we are very different across the county. And I think it is a huge mistake for people's sense of freedom and for the economy to let what is happening in King County, where they really did have a major resurgence, dictate what is happening in the counties that are hardly impacted at all. And the governor's made quite an issue out of talking about Central Washington, Yakima and Benton and Franklin County, for example. Well, I pay attention to those counties too. They have worked hard, and they are many weeks past their peak. And so I think the governor is reacting to events in King County far more than he is reacting to anything else, yet he is creating restrictions that are damaging to people across the state, whether it's really appropriate or not. And then there's one other issue as well, and that is I think that people would be much more comfortable and have a far stronger sense of shared responsibility and shared burden if the governor would bring the legislature back and we could debate the things that he's doing rather than being in this trap that we are in of executive orders. And we also forget many times that you don't have to be the governor to do a good job on public health. The county public health agencies are fully qualified and empowered to do the things that the governor's doing. And that would be, I think, a much more customized local solution.
This leads me to a really serious question about the governor's emergency powers during the COVID-19 crisis. How broad are his powers, and what, if anything, is being done to actually rein him in?
Well, his powers are very broad, and they date back to a series of 4 laws that have been passed going back to the 60s. And when you read those and when you think about the history of that time, you understand that a lot of this was written in response to thinking about the Cold War. And people were afraid of a nuclear strike during the Cold War. Later on, people became worried about widespread natural disasters like the Cascadia earthquake. And these things all could happen in such a way that the legislature couldn't function. But that's not the kind of disaster that we have right here. And so it appears to me that these regulations and these laws are designed for a different kind of disaster. Now, there have been a number of lawsuits, including a federal lawsuit that has not yet been resolved, that is actually paid for out of their own pockets by quite a few members of the Washington House Republicans. That will be decided in federal court. There's been a number of cases that have now been at least initially resolved in state court, and those have pretty much universally empowered the governor, said that he is operating within the law. That isn't the interpretation that we like, but that is what has happened at the level of the judiciary. That is the way that we handle constitutional disputes in the United States. And I think that's the appropriate response, although the governor in a press conference a couple of days ago, well, his chief of staff actually called me out and said, J.T. Wilcox, because of these lawsuits, thinks that there's no emergency and says that only old people are getting sick. I thought that was kind of a gratuitous slam on his part. And I have found during this emergency that the Republican that is most called out by name by the governor and the people that work for him is me. And so that tells me that the House Republicans are the ones that are being most effective in opposing him. But at this point, the courts have upheld his powers.
Now, in the beginning, it seemed as if our state representatives and senators were extremely supportive of the governor. Do you feel like some of that support might be wavering a bit?
Well, I think that we wanted to come together, and the Senate did that as well, and get on board with the idea that we want to address this immediately so that we don't have a healthcare system that is overwhelmed. And when that did not happen, probably partly as a result of the fact that the disease is a little bit different than had been expected, and partly because the people of Washington responded and adopted pretty safe practices, we felt like we had accomplished the part of the mission that the governor asked us to cooperate with. We just feel so strongly that the people of Washington deserve to live under a system of government as it's laid out in the Constitution. And that means three branches. And so if we're going to do major things, if the governor is going to suspend law, if the governor is going to issue emergency orders for the long term, it would not be hard to call the legislature into session. And that's what he should do. We have issued calls to our Democratic colleagues. The Constitution says that you can come back into session based on the call of a governor, which has happened every single time in the history of Washington that we've had a special session, or based on the agreement of 3/4 of the legislature. I think all or nearly all Republicans have endorsed this. I'm aware of 3 Democrats from the House just yesterday that told the Seattle Times editorial board that they want to go back to special session too. So we're going to keep issuing that call, but the Constitution decides how you go into a special session, and we're Republicans and we believe in following the Constitution. We're going to keep working on the governor and this 3/4 of the legislature.
Like many Washingtonians, I'm concerned about the lack of accountability at Washington's Employment Security Department. They've lost anywhere from $650 million to $1 billion, and many Washingtonians haven't even gotten their first unemployment check. They can't pay their mortgages, they can't take care of their families, they can't buy groceries. What exactly is being done to resolve this issue?
Well, first of all, let me say that this is exactly what you get when you have single party government. There's one thing that I've learned in 10 years in being in the minority in the Washington State House is that single party government corrupts. It corrupts the party that is holding power because they know over time that they're never going to be accountable. And in a different way, it corrupts the minority party as well, because they never have to be responsible for things. One of the things that has bothered me the most over 10 years is that failures of government never get openly investigated. You know, it may be that members of the minority party are digging into this and they are understanding way more than will be revealed to me or to the public, but I have never seen a major investigation of a governmental failure conducted by the legislature, because one of the major powers of the majority is that they set the agenda. They set what is going to be in every single committee hearing. And of course, they decide what's going to come up to a vote. And, in my mind, at the very least, there needs to be a change at the top. And I've had a few whistleblowers reach out to me and tell me that they feel like the upper management at this agency is not concerned with accuracy and with credibility. They were just getting the money out. This is what whistleblowers have been telling me, and sometimes sending it to accounts that seemed obviously not deserving people of Washington. At this point, when we're not in session, we can't even drop a bill. We can demand the resignation of the director, and many Republicans have done that, and I think that is a reasonable first step, but the whole agency needs to be reviewed. And I think we probably should try to do this in two different phases. First of all, people are in need and they're hurting because the agency isn't working. To add more turmoil at this point is probably not productive. We would like to be sure that we document everything that is possible. You may know I'm a recovering CFO. So I'm pretty familiar with the way cash flow and cash accounting works. And so we need to be sure that we're not losing any documentation. We especially need to be sure that we're not losing any of the communications that's going on inside the agency, because nobody has been able to determine at this point whether the fraud is totally outside or whether there's some fraud that involves the agency itself. Then we have a number of legislators who have deep experience in the data world, Republicans and Democrats. They've often worked together efficiently. The tragedy is we just put millions and millions of dollars into software upgrades for this agency, and clearly those were not effective. As we get out of this crisis, that whole agency and its procedures and systems need to be rebuilt.
You just mentioned cash flow, and our state is about to grapple with a huge deficit in cash flow, estimated $9 billion over the next 3 years. That's a staggering amount of money. What exactly is being done to ensure that a special session is being called, and what pressure is being put on the governor to make that happen?
Well, there have been an immense number of behind the scenes efforts to get him to understand when you have a cash flow crisis, and everyone in the private sector will understand this, the quicker you address it, the better the resolution is and the less pain you create. And especially when you have a budget cycle like we have in Washington, where a lot of new programs are stood up every single year. And the tragedy is we just started the second year of a biennium. And so the governor's going to be funding new programs that are going to absorb all of the cost of establishing them, and they will likely be cut and never disperse a dollar that actually benefits people in Washington. So House and Senate Republicans have initiated a number of efforts to get majority Democrat members to sign on to our efforts to call a special session on our own. As I mentioned before, the Constitution says you can do it two ways. Every single time in the past, in the history of Washington, Republicans and Democrats as governors have called special sessions when they have a crisis like this. Governor Gregoire did. This governor is not interested in doing that, and it's repeatedly rejected direct requests to do that as recently as yesterday, I think, at a press conference. The other way to do it is 3/4 of the legislature. Well, that would be all the Republicans plus about half the Democrats. Just yesterday, 3 Democrats told the Seattle Times editorial board that they were disappointed that the governor wouldn't call a special session. They want one. They should sign on to our letter, and then they should convince the rest of their delegation to sign on to that letter so we can start solving this problem now.
Why are they resisting calling a special session? It seems as if in the midst of this crisis, it's the logical thing to do.
I think for them in particular, there are clearly some political challenges in that. First of all, they've been in the majority for a long time, and the programs that they design, are naturally designed to benefit the people that they are the most concerned with, and those are probably people that vote with them. And if you're going to address this, a big part of it is probably going to be in reducing spending. And we've got an election coming up, in case anyone noticed, and They don't want to do that right before an election. I think that would be a natural thing, although I also think that there are Democrats in the House and Senate that are resolute and are willing to do the right thing, even if there's political pain. The other thing, and I think this is a bigger conflict inside the Democratic caucuses, is they've got a number of especially newer members from Seattle who have said, we will never support a budget adjustment that reduces spending. We don't want to reduce spending. All we want to do is add new taxes. And that means that they may not have a majority inside their caucus for any particular solution. I'm sure that the members that represent more conservative or more swing districts in the Democratic caucus are extremely concerned about having to pass an all tax increase budget. But if they don't do that now, if that's what they really want to do, they're going to do it after the election. And that doesn't seem very straightforward to voters to me.
You mentioned raising taxes. And as you know, Representative Frank Chop, the former Washington State House Speaker, recently proposed $2 billion in tax increases. And it looks suspiciously to me like a state income tax. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, yeah, it's been pretty well documented that every state that has a capital gains tax calls it an income tax. It's treated as an income tax in the U.S. tax code. It may be limited to a certain kind of income, but it's an income tax. And there have been plenty of public records requests that have uncovered emails from leaders in the Democratic caucuses in this effort, where they have been very straightforward with people that they want to have a court case that will clear the way for defining a kind of income tax that will be constitutional in Washington. And then it's Katie bar the door. So yeah, I think that there are plenty of people that see this as a crisis that's too good to waste. And this is the way that they get to achieve their cherished increase in progressive revenue. And I'll just say, one of the things that always bothers me, there's no one that thinks we've got the perfect revenue system in the state of Washington's tax system is what I really mean. It has grown. It's been pretty robust. It's grown rapidly and given us record increases in revenues and spending. But it is hard on small business. We don't really like the B&O tax, but it's been also one of the more reliable tax systems in the country. It is not as volatile as one that includes an income tax. Here's the other thing. Every single time I hear that we have this regressive tax system, nobody ever talks about fixing it and making it less regressive by cutting somebody's taxes. It's always by adding to people's tax burden. And that just seems crazy to me.
A shift in subject from public policy to the current elections. I know that you do a lot of work with Republican candidates across the state. Can you share with viewers out there what kind of work you're doing and what races in what districts should we be paying attention to?
I've been involved in campaigns for the House Republicans for 8 years. People may not realize this. We had the longest winning streak in the United States of any Republican caucus. And we went 10 years, never going backwards. And of course, we lost seats in 2018. On primary night, Andrew Barkas and I watched the returns come in, and we were down 17. And we clawed back 10 of those and ended up down 7. And so we've got a lot of work to get back, but that also means that we get to play a lot more offense. All those seats that we lost last time around are in districts that can easily be Republican again. We started honestly campaigning the day after the general election. Big part of my job is fundraising, and I have been joined by some really great members of our caucus, including Andrew Barkas, Jacqueline Maycumber, and Luann Van Werven. Because of their efforts and the efforts of the rest of our caucus, we came out of this session in the best financial position that we've ever been in. So we've been able to invest in the primary as well. And one thing that happens when you're a Republican, you can't survive a bad primary. Democrat supporters' dollars are going to be there whether it's good or bad. WA just put $250,000 into the House Democrats, and SEIU just put in another $150,000. So there's $400,000 that we have to match with a large handful of much smaller donors, and we've been working hard on that. The races that we're most concerned about right now, I'll just kind of go north to south, I think. 42nd District, Luann Van Werven won by a few hundred votes in 2018. She's a great member. It's centered on Linden, and we lost her seatmate. We have a great candidate there, Jennifer Sefcik. We're going to take that one back. I think that that's the one that I am most confident is coming back our way, and we're going to knock off that incumbent that doesn't really fit the 42nd District. Then coming south a little bit, the 10th District is a critical district for us. We hold a seat there, but Norma Smith is retiring, so Greg Gilday is going to have to hold that seat. We lost the other seat in 2018, and we have a candidate named Bill Brook. And Bill is putting up a real fight to take back that seat. And I think that one is kind of teetering on the edge. It could go our way, it could go the other way. They're both really good fundraisers. They both lived in that district for a long, long time. It's centered on Whidbey Island and parts of Skagit County. The 19th district, we elected Jim Walsh 4 years ago, first Republican to serve in the 19th district since the 1960s. He was reelected. It was tight. That is a district that is totally left behind by the Democratic Party. I would say most people there are old-fashioned FDR Democrats, and that means that they really care about the economy, they care about freedom, they care about middle-class lunch bucket issues, and they're being left behind by Seattle. And we've done some polling in there. I think that district's going strongly our way, and I think we've got a really good shot at picking up the other seat with a good candidate named Joel McIntyre. 35th is always a battlefield. Drew McEwen and Dan Griffey, they are, I think, stronger than ever, and I really don't worry about that one very much anymore. 25th district, centered on Puyallup. We've had great Republican representation there for every year, and they're so good that they move on to bigger jobs. And so we've got an open seat there. Cindy Jacobson is, I think, an outstanding new candidate for us. She is a Puyallup City Council member. She teaches math at the community college level, doorbells like a fiend, and now she's on the phone like a fiend. Pretty confident with that. And then the 28th has been back and forth. That's centered on Lakewood. It's very military. We hold the Senate seat with Steve Oban. Steve is just one of the best politicians in Olympia, and I mean that in a complimentary way. And we recently polled there, and we found that our candidate is tied with the incumbent in one seat. And we didn't poll the other one because there were so many people running, but it's an open seat. And if we're tied against an incumbent, then I think we're probably ahead in an open seat. So 28 is also going to be a real battleground for us. And, there's plenty more, but that's probably more than people can keep track of. And if you follow my page and if you follow the HROC page, you will hear an awful lot about all of these candidates. And I would strongly urge people that are interested to go to hroc.us. And you can see our members and the candidates that are cooperating with our efforts right now. You'll have links to all the information. You can also contribute there.
With everything happening across our state right now, including the recent protests and the fact that the Democrats have been in the majority for so long, do you have any encouraging words for Republicans out there as we go into the election season?
I've got a warning, and then I've got some encouragement. First of all, even though we get discouraged, we are still the only viable opposition party left on the west coast of the entire United States. We're the only ones, Washington State Republicans, that hold two statewide elected offices, and Kim Wyman and Dwayne Davidson. If we weren't viable, we wouldn't be holding those. We had a Senate majority 4 years ago. I feel very confident this time around because of the polling I've seen, especially in 28 and 19, that although it's true that this is a purple leaning to blue state, the governor is creating quite a bit of Democrat fatigue, and so is events in Seattle. Seattle may be very, very blue, but districts that have recently elected Democrats but formerly elected Republicans look at what's happening in Seattle, and they just think, for crying out loud, don't let that happen to us. Don't get captured by an approach that is purely ideological. Can we not have common sense and competent government instead of enacting experimental ideology at all costs? And those people are going to vote Republican.